Hi, this is the latest episode of the Emotion at Work podcast, where we get geekily excited about the world of emotion, credibility, deception in the workplace. Thanks very much for listening, and here comes tonight's episode. So welcome along to this edition of the Emotion at Work podcast, and today my geek is incredibly excited today. So part of what we want to do with the Emotion at Work podcast is introduce, get to chat with and interview a selection of business leaders, researchers and practitioners. And what we've got today is our first guest that spans two of those domains. So they're both a researcher and a practitioner. So this is going to be a really interesting podcast from the perspective of finding out both what they think, but also what their research is telling them as well. So for today's podcast, I'd like to welcome along SJ Lennie. Good morning, SJ.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm very good this morning. You?
Yeah, very well. Thank you. Very well indeed.
Good.
Yeah, very excited. Yay.
Geeks unite. Loving it.
Geeks unite today. So I mentioned in my introduction then that you're both a researcher and a practitioner. Do you want to explain a bit more about kind of what I meant by that and give us a bit more?
Yeah, certainly. So I'm a PhD doctoral student at Manchester University. My thesis is on emotional inauthenticity, and I'm looking at the psychological impact of emotional labour on police officers. How that comes about is I'm actually a police officer as well. So I've been a police officer for 15 years, serving in Hampshire Constabulary and more latterly in Greater Manchester Police. I had quite a successful career. I was on their accelerated promotion scheme. I'd worked in a variety of roles, and I was working as a detective inspector in South Manchester, which is when I realised I was suffering with my own mental health. Okay. Anxiety, PTSD and stuff. And in response to the kind of crime that you would expect in South Manchester, gang violence, gun crime, all the sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. But it was quite a surprise to me when I realised that I was struggling significantly. Mm-hmm. And so much so that I had to make a decision, a very difficult one, to step away from my career and reassess what I was going to do. It's this point that I spoke to my colleagues about how I was feeling, and I kind of got that reflected back to me that they were pretty distressed themselves, suffering themselves mentally, similar to a greater or lesser extent as I was, but nobody spoke about it at all. Yeah. Nobody dealt with their emotions, nobody acknowledged them. It was very stoic. It was unacceptable to discuss how you're feeling, despite the obvious that this is very distressing, exceptionally distressing work. Involved long hours, contact with very traumatised victims and perpetrators as well. And it really hit home how I just didn't think that, from an organisational perspective, it was a particularly clever way of going forward and getting the best out of your employees. And on an individual basis, I just didn't think it was acceptable. And I thought there were probably, I suspected, better ways of dealing with this. So that motivated me to go back to university. I did a master's in human resource management at Met, did a dissertation under the work psychology unit looking at emotions and burnout in the person. That's what led me to my PhD and my passion to change how organisations and society kind of view and discuss emotions, and raising awareness around the importance of being able to acknowledge your emotions and deal with the tricky things in life, because the solutions, I feel, are quite simple, but it seems to be like trying to climb Everest to get to them. So that's where I am, in a very long sentence.
So there's so much in there that I want to that I'd like to ask more questions on, which we will. And I think part of the reason that I'm so excited about today is, you and I both share a huge determination to change the narrative around emotions in the workplace, and the way that emotions are talked about and dealt with and worked with, and all those sorts of things. And we're coming at it from, I think, two quite different backgrounds, but with a really similar and aligned kind of goal behind that.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which is really good. And super excited about today. So I'd like to begin kind of near where you started, in terms of you saying that your area of interest now at the moment, for your research point of view, is emotional inauthenticity. Now I'm really intrigued by that as a title. So what made you choose sort of that as a frame to put around your research? What do you mean by emotional inauthenticity? That was a rubbish question. Let me try again. What do you mean by emotional inauthenticity?
What I mean stems, I will always kind of like talk from two perspectives, my personal experience and my research and academic angle. So when I talk about emotional inauthenticity, I'm reflecting on how, as a employee in the organisation, as a police officer, I know that I hid my emotions, and almost to an extent I hid my personality, my sensitivity to traumatic incidents, and how I empathised with people. And it also spans from my research, and I focus on emotional labour, which is part of my title. And that emotional labour is a construct from Arlie Hochschild, developed in 1983, and she identified feeling rules, which have been more latterly developed into display rules. And these are implied rules around what the organisation expects as part of an unwritten contract that you will display. So she was looking at flight attendants. They were expected to always be happy, and despite what was said of them and what they were dealing with, they were going to be happy, and the customers always writing with a smile on their faces. And they suffered quite a bit with this. So the inauthenticity comes from that, my own experience of actually hiding my emotions. And the research that looks about how we are expected to on behalf of the organisation, and how the devices that we employ to hide those emotions, so like surface acting and deep acting, are the two devices that Arlie Hochschild talks about. And that's how I explore how we fake emotions and what emotions we deal with and suppress within policing through the concept of acting and deep acting and emotional regulation and dissonance.
So emotional labour then, is that the process that happens like inside people? So that's what individuals do within themselves. Sorry, go on. It's
two things. So sorry, getting overexcited now. It's two things. So as I was kind of alluding to, as I was realising how long my answer was, is employers as such have two options of how to engage with the feeling rules, and this is what makes up the emotional labour. So the first I said was surface acting, and this is where this is an external display of the emotion. So saying being happy, you can display happiness, smile, open gestures, eye contact, where internally you can still feel, say you're having a bad day, or maybe you're depressed, but you're hiding this by faking and actioning out what people would normally expect as a happy emotion, so you may not feel it. Then there's deep acting, and this is where employees can try and modify their internal emotion, try and manipulate their feelings so they actually are in line with the requirements. This is really interesting in the scope of police work, because a lot of the previous research hasn't focused on police work and says that, internal regulation, so deep acting, can actually be helpful for your well-being and mental health. That all depends on which emotion you're internally regulating.
Okay.
So if you're a police officer and you're trying to internally regulate empathy for somebody that's significantly stressed, talk about rape victims or the family of somebody that's died in tragic circumstances, it can be quite distressing. So the emotional labour is how we choose to comply with the feeling and display rules. And it's so complicated depending on the emotion and how you engage with them as to what impact that can have on you psychologically.
And I guess the context will then shape what the degree to which the display rules and or the feeling rules apply. So if display rules are, this is what I can show at the moment, this is what I can display, whereas the feeling rules is more, this is how I'm expected / permitted to feel. These are the emotions that I'm allowed, or So therefore, I'm going to choose the deep acting approach to change. So I might have a particular emotion triggered, but I'm going to change that and change it to something else because that's what's okay for me to do. I'm guessing then the context will change the degree to which they happen. So I know, so for example, a lot of work was done around display rules. So in emotion expression research, there was some really interesting work done when universality of emotional expression. So when Paul Ekman did his research into what are called the 7 universals, so happy, sad, anger, disgust, fear, surprise, contempt, looking at the extent to which when those emotions are experienced, what they look like on the face. So one of the challenges was then, okay, well, are those expressions universal? And initially, when research was done in Asian cultures, there was questions asked about they don't appear to be present. But then there's one study in particular where people were shown a film either in the presence of people in an Asian culture were shown a film either in the presence of others or on their own, and when others were present, they would manage the display of the emotion on their face, whereas when others were absent, the emotion would show fully, if that makes sense. So in the where I'm going with this then is, so in the police force, were there any context where those rules were relaxed? So for example, if you were just with your sergeant or with your inspector, on a one-to-one type basis, were the rules any different there versus when you were, say, with your peers or with your colleagues?
This is a really interesting point, and this is probably something that I find is significantly impacted. So you would anticipate the feeling and display rules for police officers to exist at a scene. So when you have a police officer attending a scene, so with a member of the public, victims, witnesses, grieved parties, perpetrators, you would expect those rules to exist and exist in a very formal sort of sense, which most members of the public, anybody in society, could anticipate, to take control, to suppress emotion, don't get upset. And I don't think we can ever change that, and that's the way it should be. My fascination, interest, concern is how these rules permeate throughout an officer's lives and all their relationships. So as you quite rightly said, how do they deal with emotion with their peers, their colleagues? Now, bearing in mind that research shows that social support from peers who experience similar or same trauma is the best support for moderating PTSD symptoms. However, these feeling rules still apply when it comes to peers and colleagues, so they're still not allowed to express emotion. The only emotion that is permissible, it would appear, within the organisation is anger.
Okay.
Very odd. Otherwise, it's no emotion. So they're not allowed to talk about emotions exist. Having emotions, feeling distressed, fear is completely unacceptable as a conversation. Just doesn't exist. You manipulate. If we're talking deep acting, you will manipulate your fear into anger, particularly out on the street to deal with something. Obviously, you can't show fear when you're dealing with an angry man. That's how. And a lot of this answers a lot of questions about police aggression. It's a lot of fear that's coming out, but this permeates into relationships with colleagues, as I said, but also supervisors. The rules apply here as well, because police officers perceive that the emotion rules, and this emotional regulation, this requirement to suppress and not have feelings, is an unofficial performance indicator. So if you're stoic and you don't show and display emotion, you come across as completely unaffected, then you're a good egg, and you're reliable and you're resilient and you're a good body. But if you show emotion, you're weak and you're not up to the job. Literally the words of the police officers, if you show emotion, you're not up to the job, you need to get another job. Quite brutal. What concerns me even further is it goes out of the organisation and into relationships with spouses, partners, families and social groups. And I've become interested in this so there's two different aspects there. Spouses and partners and family, police officers who are either married to other police officers, so the rules apply. Or they're not, and their spouses, partners, families are members of the public to need protecting. So either way, because I'll take it back to me. So my research is audio diary. So I deal a lot of narrative of people just telling me how they feel. My husband didn't sign up for this. They're not a police officer. They don't want to know distressing circumstances of what I've dealt with today. My wife doesn't need this. I can't talk to them. They won't understand. These are the things that are said to me. So there's this continued suppression for whatever reason, but then you go into society and their social group and their friends, and they're police officers again. They're viewed as police officers in a public setting. Yeah. So they'll go on a night out and they'll say, there's a fight over there, you're going to deal with it. There's Bobby's like, oh, really? And I'm interested in the literature, fictional literature and film, and the perpetuation of the burnt-out cop, the hard-boiled policeman, how it has entered the public psyche that these officers should suppress emotion, that this is how they are, that it's acceptable that they suppress emotion, that their marriages fail and that they end up drinking and getting older before their time and dying young. But it exists. So these feeling rules, as you quite right say, are they permissible in different places? Well, there are some emotions that are permissible, so spoke about anger. But the rules seem to apply throughout their lives, and there are very few openings for police officers. If they speak about, sometimes if they're with a colleague, they've been with for like, say, 18 months, they've got to know them, they trust them, they don't think they're trying to gain a promotion. There's a lot of work at the moment about identifying well-being and what you've done to help somebody else's mental health. So people tend to be a bit suspicious of each other if they're going for promotion. Are you going to use me as an example in your interview?
Oh, really?
So it takes a long time to build trust with people. But that is the only time that they'll actually possibly allude to opening up a little bit. They might say, that was a bit hairy there, wasn't it? That's it. That's fear. That's the expression of fear.
Okay.
So it's fascinating, and the whole thing just adds to this trauma that's experienced.
So, because there's a few things in that I find really, really interesting. So, from a non-police setting, then, so I'm really fascinated by the role that identity plays in the workplace.
Yeah.
My background is much more of a corporate setting than yours, and so often people will talk about, well, not often. I've heard people talk about like there's a home me and there's a work me.
Yes.
Also, I hear people talk about, leaving organisations so they can reinvent themselves in a new one. So when they're in a company, they've been bound by, they're bound by their history and their background and the experience they've had as an individual in that organisation and the roles that they've done. And when they move to a new organisation, they kind of get set free in response to that. But also, I hear people talk about different versions of themselves in different interactions that they have with different people. And the delineation of identity according to context is something that I get really fascinated by. So there's a lady called Helen Spencer-Oty who's at the University of Cambridge. And what she's trying to do is to link, well, not she's trying to do, what she's doing in her research is she's starting to link together the more fundamental view of oneself as their identity with how that then plays out in their day-to-day interactions that they have at work. So you've got someone like, say, Irving Goffman, who was a sociologist from the sort of late 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, who did a lot of research into the concept of face, and the face being your representation in a particular interaction. And normally, and it's quite distinct in that's the Goffmanian view as to that face is the version of you that you're bringing to that interaction, and people don't really link it back to identity, and that's what Helen Spencer-Oty is trying to do, is to say, well, actually, if that is the version of yourself that you're bringing to an interaction, it's got to come from somewhere. You've got to be bringing that from somewhere to bring it to that particular interaction. So it's coming from that's that identity that you've decided or given or negotiated or built for yourself, which is going to be shaped by what's around you. And I suppose if I then link that back to what you were talking about just now, about when a police officer is in multiple contexts and in contexts that are nothing to do with their work, so home, out with friends, so on and so on, that identity is brought with them both by themselves, but also by other people that are around them. Yes. Wow.
It's identity is, and I struggle with this on a personal level because I'm on a career break at the moment. So I'm still a police officer. And that forms a very strong part of my identity. I was also brought up by two police officers, so it's very much part of me. And I think I've got to let that go at some point. And it's a conversation I've had with my supervisor on more than one occasion. I've got a few years yet before, I consider whether I'm resigning or whatever, which will be that point. So, But I do think that you're very right. The identity, there's also a bit about self-selection here, why people join the police, what they identify, how they carry that. But you're quite right, is that when you learn, when you first put on the uniform and you attend an incident, people look at you and they stop seeing you. They see the uniform, they see what they believe a police officer to be, they impress certain expectations upon you. And you as a police officer, because a lot of the work that you do is, I hate to say it, but manipulating other people's emotions to get them to comply with you. Mm-hmm. You don't use aggression and force. You all the time it's negotiation and manipulation and compromise. And is that you try and be whatever it is that's in their eyes that they need you to be for them to do what is required at that time. So you start to morph into people's expectations to get the job done. And if you think about a shift for a police officer, say a 10-hour shift, and you're going to say 15 to 20 incidents maybe, different incidents, different contexts, different people, different requirements, different crimes, different social situations. You're constantly manipulating yourself, your identity, what do people need, what do I need to achieve here, and you're fluctuating. And I think the speed of the way that police officers are moving and defending themselves emotionally and moving in and out of these emotions and how they maintain a static identity of the police officer is fascinating. And then, as I said before, it spills out into social life. People, as soon as they know you're a police officer, and I see it when I say that to people, when I speak to them, they change a little and they identify with you differently. So it is quite impressed upon you, the sense of identity as well as being on duty 24/7.
Yeah.
But I find the idea of different faces and that not being linked to identity, I don't know how it can't be. I think it's your choice. To not be emotionally affected by something and not display an emotion is an identity choice, because you're choosing to display an identity that is of stoic nature. Quite repressed.
Okay. So I just want to sort of pause a little bit for a second. And what I mean by that is, earlier on you talked about the role of peers and peer support, particularly working through things like PTSD. And one of my phrases that I work really hard to kind of catch myself on is where I say things like research suggests or research says. So you mentioned that earlier on. Would you be able to, not necessarily know the second, but to let me know so I can put in the podcast notes some links to where, so if people wanted to go to read to find out more about who did that research, then they could go and find it. Would that be okay?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yes.
Cool, thank you.
In fact, I could probably do it within a couple of seconds, but I will do.
Yes, well, I don't mind if we capture it as we speak, then that's fine. People can just write it down themselves. They can go away and find it. I just want to make sure that we give listeners the opportunity to go and find some stuff, which is why I was particularly talking about, say, Hannah Spencer-Oatey's research, so that people that are listening can go and find it. They can go and find some of the stuff that if they want to do some more reading, then they can.
Yeah, certainly.
Okay. Cool, thank you. So, sticking with the emotional inauthenticity just for a minute, because one other thing that it sparks for me is and I guess I might even be being a little bit playful here, in an institution where often the police are trying to find the truth.
Yes.
I find it interesting that there's a bucket load of deception that's going on. Granted, it could be self-deception, but so it poses an interesting contrast to me.
It's a very good point, isn't it? It's the games that we play. Yeah, I think it's self-deception. I have to be honest with you.
Yeah, okay. But is the organisation compliant in it, do you think? So does it make life easier for the institution or for the particular police force to allow or to be or to ignore or be oblivious to that?
It's very difficult because, as I say, the rules are more implied than they are explicit.
Yeah.
So, without wanting to delve too much into culture, because that's a massive area,
yeah,
it is a cultural issue. I think a lot of the problem is, I've been looking at dissociation recently as a psychological output of emotional suppression and dealing with trauma and how trauma is dealt with. And there's it's clear that, well, look at research, Bernstein and Putnam have done quite a lot of work on this, and they're not the only ones in the area. Again, I can give you so many references, but not processing trauma pretty soon after a traumatic event and suppressing emotion leads to high levels of dissociation, and I've just done a piece of research on this. What I think part of the problem is, you talk about the organisation being complicit in it, is that all police officers go through the ranks. They're all indoctrinated into this culture and taught this as a coping mechanism.
Okay.
So all police officers will learn to cope with what they see through the norms of their colleagues. So you go onto a team and nobody talks about the emotion, they suppress it, so you may see something that's distressing, but you see that your colleagues aren't even flickering as an emotional recognition, and you learn to do this too. And once you start suppressing emotion and you start getting into levels of dissociation, which are, it would appear from a research, pretty prevalent, you don't learn, you're not recognising emotions, you're accepting it as a social norm. So I don't know how well recognised it is within the organisation about what is actually happening within, mainly because it's so accepted, but also because the people that you may consider should be in charge and should identify and deal with it are probably suffering themselves from dissociation and therefore can't. So it's tricky. It's really tricky.
Yeah, I can imagine it's really tricky, actually. Because the need to,
it's difficult. There's a need to protect yourself, and because what they're dealing with is constant, there's a constant need to protect, and dissociation is a way of protecting. It is a coping mechanism in itself, but it's the continuation of it. But if there's no let-up, or there's no built-in system or time for people to step aside and say, okay, let's process this trauma, move on and be a healthy individual, they will stay in a state of dissociation and depersonalisation and derealisation. And particularly people that are in senior ranks, they will successfully employ this as a coping mechanism. So they're not necessarily going to want to change or know to change, which is why I want to do the research and kind of like open up options and try and... My first point about my research is identifying this and bringing it to the forefront and explaining it and showing it in different ways. So I'm very keen on emotional narrative and authenticity, authentic narrative, and getting the spoken word, and then relating that to psychological outcomes so that I can say, look, this is a thing that's here. When it's not just culture, it's not just something in the mist that we can't kind of touch. It's something that's here and it's having an impact. And then looking at, okay, so how are we going to deal with this, and getting people to acknowledge its existence. Yeah, it's quite tough.
Yeah, I can imagine it's tough, and also could potentially be a tough argument, or because it's challenging, because it is potentially going to challenge the cultural and organisational norms. Then it might be something that is difficult for people to accept as well in that way.
I could imagine people being quite scared of, okay, suddenly we want, they want feeling empathetic police officers, because we know that officers that can empathise will do such a fantastic job on the streets, because they'll deal with people better, they'll provide a service that the public really deserves. But I can see that the fear side of that is it's very painful for people when they're empathising, when they're emotionally open and aware. and experiencing, if you think about all the things they go to, there's going to need a lot of psychological support and a lot of coping mechanisms put in place. And I can see that the organisation would be quite scared en masse doing that, because you would end up with quite a lot of traumatised people that need help. But I do think there's a way through it. I'm not saying there isn't. I think that, like I say, social support is exceptionally important, and there's small things that can be done, but it's a massive step.
Yeah, because you potentially got a threat, so fear is in response to a threat of harm, which often in a police setting is a physical one. It's a very real physical threat to physical harm, both to yourself or your colleagues or to the public or whoever that might be. But equally as valid is when you perceive a threat to your psychological self. When you perceive a threat to your sense of identity or your sense of well-being, or how you're perceived by others, or by others or peers that are around you, whether that be friends or family or colleagues or whoever that is. That fear will come in the same way. As soon as you perceive that threat of harm, then fear will happen. I think it was it wasn't this week, it was last week. I was chatting with an individual who was recalling an occasion where they were sat in a team meeting, and the leader of the team made a comment about a particular project, and it just sent fear running through them, because even though the individual hadn't been named, because their project had been named and they'd been part of the project, there was they picked up on a threat to their credibility or their performance and their ability or their competence, I should say, probably, in doing their job. And it was a very real sense of, they're talking about me, and then they were unable to pay attention for 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes afterwards, because they were caught in the grip of that. Are they talking about me? What have I done? What have I missed? What ball have I dropped? Why are we talking about this now? And it just creates that emotional.
And fear is fear, no matter the stimulant. I mean, police officers would be afraid from the whole thing is the emotional suppression is a reputational fear. A fear of being seen as bad at their job because they're emotional, and that's just as strong, if not stronger, than the fear of being stabbed or physically harmed. In fact, possibly more, because they'll probably bobby this handle. If I get physically injured, more than my reputation, or you're not good at your job because of that threat to identity, as you quite right to say, which is intrinsic to us. So fear is fear, no matter the stimulant.
And I also think for a lot of the things that you've been talking about there, in terms of the display rules, the feeling rules, and the surface and the deep acting and the cultural norms, whilst we've been grounding it in the police, I think it also translates across to organisational life. If I think about the work of Brené Brown, so the popularity in kind of corporate leadership world of Brené Brown's work around vulnerability and what she said, she started with vulnerability and then she went to shame, and the popularity of that's grown massively in the corporate sector. But from my practical experience, I don't see it permeating out, and actually really changing the narrative. If I think about there was a piece on the news, I think it was earlier this week, where the CEO of Uber was captured on a camera. So the cabbie had a camera in his cab to make sure, to record. So an Uber cabbie had a camera in his cab to record passengers. So in case anything happened, if there was disagreements on fare or so on, and it captured the CEO of Uber being verbally aggressive to the driver in the car, and it took a couple of days or sort of 36 hours, I think it was, until he went publicly online and issued an unreserved apology of, what, I screwed up and I need to go get some help because what I did was inappropriate. And that's really rare, really rare for somebody senior within an organisation to fess up, I suppose, in that way, because the desire or the perceived need to maintain your credibility is, it's just a fascinating one, and it affects so many different things.
Well, I think if you take it out beyond the context of policing, which is an extreme context, I would say, but you're looking at into what is a patriarchal society that being strong, being the top of your game, being competitive, the capitalist fight to be the top and constantly grow, to suppress emotion in an environment that's emasculinated. It's everywhere you can't be seen to say, I made a mistake, because that's a weakness. We don't do weakness, which is why emotions aren't acceptable, because we think emotions are weaknesses too. And it's such a shame, because there can be such strength. Again, empathy comes into this. There's such strength from identifying yourself as being a human being and not being perfect. And that's, more CEOs need to acknowledge that, because for your employees to be comfortable, to be happy, to be creative, they need to be able to make mistakes and be human. And they're the ones that give permission for this. But it's not just organisations, it's society. It's prevalent with any area of society. It's society, the top, impenetrable.
But I also think there's a load of politeness rules that kind of come in with it as well. So I remember I was walking through Chiswick, probably about, I don't know, I can't remember when, a year ago, maybe more. And there was a lady walking down the street, and she was just really upset. So she was, prototypical face expression of sadness, inner corners of the eyebrows raised, lip corners pulled down, bottom lip quivering. And she walked past and I was walking towards her, and I saw, must have been at least 15, if not 20 people look up, recognise it, and then walk off. Because I think there's some politeness rules around going up and approaching somebody saying, "Are you okay?" So me being me broke all those rules, and stopped. I kind of got up to her, and then rather than stopping her, I turned around and walked alongside her and said, I noticed that it looks like you're a bit upset. Are you okay? Is everything all right? And she said, yeah, I'm fine. And I said, are you sure? I just want to make sure that you're okay. And she said, yeah, I'm fine. I just kind of need to be on my own for a bit. And I thought, well, I'll leave you alone, because it's none of my business, but
you've done such a good thing there.
Well, thank you. But I think it's the politeness rules that are present within the UK, as an example, I think also reinforce that that kind of norm around. Actually, I feel quite uncomfortable. I feel uncomfortable with someone walking down the street displaying their emotion in the way that they are. I feel uncomfortable with that, and I don't. And my way of working with it is I'm going to ignore it as opposed to doing something with or about it.
I think this is a really important point. I think as Brits, you quite rightly identified, we are quite emotionally suppressed, quite stoic. It's not natural for us, and we do get embarrassed, don't we? We don't know how to deal with it because we're not brought up to deal. We're brought up, and certainly I was, to suppress emotion. And this is why, for me, I'm really interested in. I don't believe that findings into my research that I'm going to do in the UK will be generalisable to other countries, because every different country has different rules about emotional display. So that in itself will impact society. Natural order of things will impact the police and how they deal with it, because we work to what society expects of us, and will impact organisations. And it brings me back to your point about you talking, looking at Asia, about what emotions were displayed. For me, I look at words and how we express ourselves verbally, I would suggest, mainly. And I'm interested in how different cultures have different numbers of words for different emotions. There are some words that we don't even, or some emotions we don't even have words for in English. And that in itself just shows how societies, as you quite say, politeness or comfortable, how comfortable we are with emotion translates literally from culture to culture. So I do think you're right. There is a politeness about, or an uncomfortableness and embarrassment on the Brits, I think, about being able to express emotions, which, as you say, the societal sort of pressure for everything to be okay.
And we've been talking a lot about sort of fear and anger, I suppose, have been the dominant two. But I even see that with things like pride and appreciation and praise. You know, there's a company called OC Tanner, and I know a couple of folk there. Rob Ordover's one, and Dawn Smedley's another. And their whole kind of business model is around appreciation and recognition, and all through a non-financial means. And the level of discomfort that I see in individuals when they initially start to do this stuff is really big. So I did a piece of work with a group of 60 kind of senior leaders within a UK retail organisation, and I was a kind of part of a classic leadership development-y thing. But one of the things that I did is I allocated an hour, I think it was an hour and 15 minutes in the agenda for appreciation. So I started off by, I probably took about 15 minutes of that, sort of setting some context around why I think appreciation is important, how you can do it, and I framed it very specifically and set some rules around it. And then I said, right, you've got an hour now to show appreciation to others. Now, there could be other people in this room, so they could be your peers, they could be your managers, but they could also be people that aren't in this room. So they could be members of your team or other people within the wider parts of the organisation. But you've got an hour now to go and share some appreciation with others of what it is. And I was really clear. So this isn't like soft soaping stuff. This is, if you've got nothing if you don't feel you have any appreciation to give them, that's fine. But likewise, we're giving you an hour, take some time to think about it and do it. And then after an hour, I was looking at the agenda and so on, and I wrapped the session up. And my one bit of feedback at the end of the day, or my one complaint at the end of the day was, why did you stop us? We've never done it before. It was amazing, and you stopped us. Why did you stop us? And I find it really, it was a really fascinating thing, because I only gave them an hour because I thought they'd feel really uncomfortable, and then I stopped it. They're like, no, you shouldn't have done that. You should have, we'd have preferred, I'd say we, the individual said, I'd have preferred it if you'd have let it run. And I said, well, that's great. So my challenge to you is, how do you do it outside of this room? So I've now given you a framework that allows you to do it. How do you do it outside of the room? And also then in more general life, part of my research was about analysing performance reviews that happened in a corporate organisation, and the way that people gave praise was really weird. So occasionally there was, a very direct one, which is, this happened, you did it really well, well done, thank you. But there are other times where the appreciation would be given by putting someone else down. This person isn't very good at these things, and thankfully I don't have to talk to you about them. And I'm like, what an indirect way of saying you're good about something. So that's so power play, isn't it? That's fear creating. I don't have to tell you that you're not bad, but if you are, But I also think there was some the individual in question was trying to make themselves look better as a manager. So they were trying to say, your peer isn't good at these things, and I'm telling you that I know they're not good at these things. So I want you to know that I'm on top of that because I've got a note to talk to them.
I'm interested in that in so much the way that obviously the person that's delivering the performance review, bearing in mind this is meant to be about somebody else, not the manager, is bringing their own ego and demonstrates a level of vulnerability and needs to be seen by the good employee as a good manager.
Absolutely.
Oh dear!
I know it's fast, and it's fascinating stuff. And I was about to say the worst thing is, and that's an inappropriate choice of language. The bit that I missed in my research my regret for my research is that I didn't go back and speak to the managers and the individuals that took part in my research to find out how aware they were of it, and or if they ascribe the same meaning that I as the researcher have ascribed. Because in this kind of research paradigm, there's two approaches. There's what's called the first order approach, which is where you use what's happening in the interaction to decide how people evaluated it. So in that particular example, the individual that received the comments of, so the individual that was in the performance review that was made to say, you're good at these things because this person's bad, they didn't respond in it. They didn't give any audible response other than a small laugh. so it's difficult to know how they evaluated it. So they didn't say thanks. So I'm not, so I don't know if they accepted it or not. They left it ambiguous about whether they.
So the feedback loop doesn't really. They're not getting much feedback on it.
So they didn't voice an inappropriate or a dissent, but they also didn't voice a recognition or an assent either. So it's really difficult to know. So the first order approach is where you look at what's happened. The second order approach is when you as the researcher who understands the context or the community or practice, you ascribe kind of meaning to it or potential meaning to it, which is what I've done. But the bit that I think I missed was the opportunity to go back to the individuals that took part in the research and say, when this happened, how did you interpret that? Or as you listen back to it now, how do you interpret it? Because part of me wonders is, actually, am I making it a deal when actually it isn't a deal?
Well, that's so interesting. I'm just doing a bit at the moment on the role of research and reflexivity, and particularly in qualitative research and looking at case study and stuff. And transference, particularly in social psychological research, is such a problem, isn't it? I can see. I mean, that is important to check back and see, is this a thing or is it just a thing because I think it should be a thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, totally. It'd be interesting to know, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would. And the challenge is, that I captured the data 2 years ago now, so memory will be fallible enough for people to go, I don't know, I can't remember how I felt then. So when it comes to doing more research, that's a key learning for me in terms of how do I get that perspective, and even then I won't necessarily know for sure that was how they felt. All I will know is what they're telling me about how they felt. Which
I think interesting also is what do they accept? What are their feeling rules about what's acceptable? And are they like, no, that's fine. That's what happens. If they've not really looked at it, can they identify themselves that stepping back? Oh, that's not really that acceptable.
Yeah. So
it's complicated.
It is. And this is where, and I can feel the soapbox being presented and me standing up on it. But this is where I get really frustrated by a lot of the work in and around emotion and or emotional intelligence, where people talk about self-awareness, and it's used as for me, it's used as like a throwaway term. Are they just not very self-aware is something I hear regularly, or they just need to work on their self-awareness. I'm like, but do you not, that is like it's a monumentally big thing, self-awareness. It's something that takes, as you said earlier on, it takes reflection, it takes reflexivity, it takes effort and energy, and I get frustrated that it's almost used as a throwaway comment.
It's something that sounds to me like how, and if you're talking in an organisational culture,
I am,
how resilience is used as a term. It certainly in the police, I see it as a bar to be measured against. Unrealistically, you're either resilient or you're not. You're either self-aware or not, and if you're not good enough. Well, as you say, to be truly self-aware, and who is? You have to understand your upbringing, the contributions into your psychology, what traumas you may have experienced and not processed, which create this amazingly complex mind map, and then introduce yourself into a culture that you may not necessarily understand, that only you have a perception of through your senses, which are tainted by your own personal experience. I don't know if we could ever be truly self-aware to the point where we extrapolate all those problems and understand them. I mean, Freud and Jung spent years trying to do that, and whether they eventually ever attained true, total self-awareness, I don't know if we can.
No, I don't know either.
But it's not an overnight thing, is it? I think I'm consciously incompetent at that level. I know I don't know myself well enough.
and I think there's I had a thought earlier on which I didn't share at the time, but feels okay to go, contextually okay to share now. So when you were talking about when I asked you around how complicit is the organisation or the institution of the police in what's happening, and it made me wonder, actually, is there a degree of organisational self-awareness or institutional self-awareness that happens there? So if you've got, if the institution is made up of people that have learnt this implied cultural norm or these implied rules around what you can show and how you can feel, it could be that there is a complete lack of awareness that this is actually a thing, and it's only because of your experience. And I know you're not alone. I know there are other people within the institution of police doing it as well. But through your own personal experience, you've then gone, hang on a minute, this is a thing.
Yeah. I think so, and I think I suffered, particularly being brought up by police officers, of not understand. I could talk about mental health, and I cared very deeply about it, and I cared very deeply about my colleagues, my DCs, people, my teams around and underneath, and the people I was there to protect as such within the organisation and look after. I don't think, unless you do have that wake up moment where you are really poorly and you go, oh my God, what has been going on here? I think it's very difficult to have that level of awareness when, and this is, I toyed for a while about bystander syndrome, as whether that was what was going on in the organisation, because I just couldn't get why people weren't going, hang on a minute, this is a bit weird, isn't it? Why are we all stood here not feeling anything when these tragically difficult things are happening? So I do think that organisationally there's not that, I think it's growing, as you quite rightly said, other people are working in the area. There's more wellbeing stuff that's going on, but I don't know how really that is an understanding, but at least it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
I think it's difficult on an individual and an organisational level to have this awareness when you are completely submersed within a culture. It's difficult to see it and see your part within it. It's all pervasive, particularly when police officers, as I've said before, don't step outside of it. It continues into their home, it continues into society. They never step outside of this culture. It's expected from every angle and impressed upon them. So, yes, I'm not about to say the organisation is bad in any sense, because I just don't think that they can be found culpable, them, or a victim of their own circumstances.
Yeah. And I think that translates across to wider organisational / well, different aspects of life, whether that be work or home. You know, when you're in something, it's really hard to see. You know, to use an old adage, it's hard to see the wood for the trees when you're in it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm aware of a number of people that I interact with who, when they look back on their time in a particular place, they were like, "Wow, how did I do that there? You know, how did I cope in that kind of context or that environment, or how did I work with this or that or the other?" But because you're in it, it's just the norm. You know, it is what it is, and working with it is hard. So I think in terms of where I'd like to take the conversation next, then. So we've talked about your context of the police in particular.
Yeah.
But I also recognise that there's an awful lot of reports, both in the media and wider coverage and in research, around the state of mental health within the corporate world or within the world of work. So what I want to sort of get us thinking now is around what either hints or tips or advice or suggestions could we give either individuals for themselves, in terms of how, you know, if they feel like they're suffering and they might be on a way to burnout or on the journey to that, or for practitioners that can help others, so they might be coaches or they might be HR professionals, those sorts of things. So what advice or hints or tips do you think we could give to the people that are listening to help them work with some of these things and some of the stuff that we've talked about over the course of our discussion so far?
Right, this is where my research eventually hope I'll end, is what interventions can we do with and I mean all organisations, please. So tips for HR practitioners, organisations. So there's a couple of things. I think the way we are with productivity and the hours that we work in the UK, we seem to think being sat at a desk is an indication of productivity. No, the biggest colours, it's not true. We are so low on productivity but high on hours. Is we need to give people space, time. We need to allow them to walk away from their desks and do what it is that individual needs to do to make them okay. I think that's really important, and I think organisations need to take a deep breath and go, do you know what, I know this will make me more productive, even if I'm terrified of giving my staff this time, because it is going to be organisational time. give this over to their mental health to make sure that they're well, because it's a win situation for organisations. Because they're well, they're engaged, we know the story, they are productive, and we will do better as a country, as economically, as society. So being brave, not questioning them, trusting them to do what they need to do, because coping with trauma and traumatic situations, whether that be fear of a loss of job or the pressure and stress of a deadline, everybody has an individual coping mechanism. If you're dealing with trauma specifically, talking is so important. I'm just looking at some of my references here about, psychological trauma. If you don't deal with it, that's when you need to post-traumatic stress disorder. And this can be anything in anybody's life. I know that a lot of organisations won't interact with the nasty side of life like police does, but these happen to normal everyday people, and they will go through traumatic life experiences, whether it be divorce, death of a loved one, whether it's serious illness, whatever it is. And organisations need to support, so HR needs to be able to support people, and in that it's that time, and it's getting people to talk, and that has to be acceptable within the organisation. So whether it's providing peer support networks, so people you can go to and talk to in confidence if you don't feel that you can openly ask for psychological support, providing areas like that. Providing space and time, and in fact enforcing it, because a lot of people won't voluntarily engage with wellbeing and psychological support mental health programs through fear of stigma. So you can't set something up and expect people to go to it. When we dealt with tragic incidents within GMP that were quite significant, we set up, and I don't want to go into too much detail about that. We set up counselling services. We put counsellors in police stations. We put open door policy. You can go and engage. Nobody went in because of the fear of walking through that door and the stigma. So you have to tell people, you go in this room, you sit down, have a cup of tea and talk. Talk about football if you want, or you can talk about something more fundamental. But there's going to be an element, if you want culture change, is forcing people down a tunnel. They can use it how they want, but give them the space, give them, is it the Swedish who have the time where, 11 o'clock every day, everybody stops, everybody has a cup of tea and a slice of cake if they want.
Okay.
And everybody talks. There's a lot of talk around, the old tea trolley and stuff like that. People used to have an enforced break, so they would walk away from the screen, very good for health and safety, but also it gave people an opportunity to do, without feeling pressured, to have a conversation if they wanted to about the situation, because it's going to be their peers that are going to be the best. So I would say that organisations need to look at stop putting fruit on the table and doing something quite fundamental and radical, and taking a deep breath and not being afraid of giving time back to their employees to allow them to support themselves. Oh, God, soapbox moment. Right, and I could go off forever, can't I?
No, that's brilliant.
I was going to say, for the individuals, you want to, I think, God, so I've been doing some research on behalf of my supervisors. I mentioned this earlier about looking at stress experts and how they deal with stress, so academics that have researched the area of stress and resilience, mental health, and how they personally cope with it. And we'll go back to self-awareness, but knowing your triggers, knowing what's important for you, knowing when you're not quite so well, knowing where your cut-off point is, and knowing how to identify it, B, communicate it to the people that need to know in a way that you're comfortable with, then finding your own personal coping mechanisms. Meditation's massively good, yoga, fitness, exercise, or just reading a book, or going into nature, find something beautiful, removing yourself from circumstances. There are so many different things, and it's such an individual thing. And also, triggers are individual. One person's stressor is nothing to another person, but they will be stressed by something else. Me and my husband are completely different. He will get stressed about shopping and those sorts of things, and I get stressed about deadlines, But the other doesn't get stressed about, we're completely different in that level, but we both suffer in the same way when we do get stressed. and there's no denying how that feels, no matter what the trigger.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So there's a couple of questions to finish off then. So and they're about sort of your thoughts on where people can go next and where I should go next. So what I mean by that is I'll ask you in a minute for any recommendations of books or articles or places for people to go to find out more if they want to find out more around the topics we've been discussing. You know, where should they go? What could they go look for? But also I'm interested in who else do you think we should look to get on the podcast? So are there any other, and again, there could be business leaders or they could be researchers or they could be practitioners, or a combination of those three. But you know, who should we go and hunt out and find and say, SJ sent me because she said you'd be awesome for this.
Right, okay. I'll have to think about a few. My first one, I'm going to say, I don't know whether you've made contact yet, my ex-DOS now, Anna Sutton.
Okay.
I think her research is really interesting into authenticity and identity.
Okay.
Who else would I have? I'm trying to think somebody corporate. Let's see. What were the other questions you had for me?
Books. Any books or videos or recommended reading? And if people want us to find out more, you know, they should.
I would say read Managed Heart by Ollie Rothschild. Okay, so that's emotional labour. It's a dead good read. That's so articulate. It's a dead good read. Yeah, it is. She's really worth reading. She researches air hostess and bill collectors.
Okay.
And so it's nothing to do with the police. It's nothing. It is proper corporate environment. It's in 1983. She does this study, and she links that to burnout and how, you know, suppressing your emotions is really so bad for you. But they're positive emotions, so it's completely contrasting to anything that I do. But I use her concepts. But I think that for certainly HR managers and anybody in corporate organisations, it helps you to understand how even forcing your employees to be smiley and happy all the time can be so detrimental to their well-being and then their ability to work for you. So I think that's an important read.
Okay.
Very important.
So remind me, what was the book called again?
The Managed Heart.
The Managed Heart. Wonderful.
By Ollie Rothschild.
Thank you.
Fantastic. A bit of a Bible for me.
Good. I like it when somebody is really clear on a book that would be really good to read. So no, I like
do you
that.
know, she's brilliant. So I've got a background in art. So I was a musician in the army before I ventured into the police. It's a long story. So my A-levels were music, and I also did theatre as well. So a bit of acting, hence my interest in surface and deep acting.
Yeah.
So she talks a lot about Hamlet, she talks about Stanislavski and actual acting techniques as well throughout it. So she draws, and I do this in my research. I find it quite fascinating. So she draws on the arts, which plays into Jung. I would read Jung.
And it probably plays into Goffman as well then, because Goffman talks a lot about dramaturgy and and stage and self-presentation and those sorts of things.
And backstage and stuff. Yes, absolutely. So it's another good read. Jung, there's a book called The Introduction to Jung, and I think it's by a chap called Stevens. It's it makes it easy to engage with, and I think that's a really social psychological way of looking at things, how we are all linked in our terms of emotion and how we deal with things. That can get quite deep, but
okay. Well, what we'll do is we'll put links to both of those on the podcast notes. We'll put links to both of those, so we've got so people can go find them. And I'll try and do this from more than just Amazon, other web-based book purchasing.
Well, I've also got a number of academic journal articles that I've got the names of sat in front of me here. That
that'd be good. I can put those as well.
Yeah,
that'd be good.
But I'll just end up reading off a list of names and it'll be meaningless.
No, that's fine. We'll put them in the podcast notes. That's good.
Yeah.
Okay. So definitely go and hunt out Anna. Anyone else? Anyone else that we should go and find? Do you think?
See, a lot of the people that I know are police based. Because that's who I follow.
No, that's okay.
Can I get back to you on that? There's a
Yeah,
few
of course you can. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, that's good.
Yeah,
That's
we'll get
lovely.
back to that.
Okay, is there, my final question then, in a very good Nancy Klein time to think style then, is there anything else that you're thinking, anything else that you're feeling, anything else that you'd like to say before we bring it together and close?
I think I've probably not spoken enough about the importance of actually speaking emotions.
Okay.
And I'll find you all the references. In fact, I might have a paper set next to me at the moment. But actually being able to talk about your emotions is a significant moderator for dealing with those emotions. And not being able to name the emotions you're experiencing is a sign of mental distress. Practitioners, this is important because they're simple things, but they're really telling and really important. And I'll send you some links to that. But if you can't do anything else, if we don't have lots of money to bring in psychological support, we don't have lots of money for training, we don't have lots of time to give, if nothing else, talking is possibly one of the most important and impactful tools for looking after our own mental health, looking after each other, creating that social community that's healthy and supportive. And that's what I'm trying to do. And what I found from my own personal experience of actually opening up to my colleagues and having them in return open up to me, because I gave them, not necessarily gave them the power, but they weren't afraid once I'd opened up about how I felt to speak. So storytelling for me is so important. Tell your own story and other people will tell you theirs. And that's such a beginning in any organisation to getting a better culture, to a healthy emotional work.
Fab, wonderful. I agree with you wholeheartedly. So one of my real frustrations with Daniel Goleman's work, as an example, is the first person I ever read on emotional intelligence. Part of me feels, kind of almost guilty about the fact that I then go on to say one of the biggest issues that he calls is that he lumped every emotion together into one and called it emotional intelligence. And for me, it's not about that. It's about emotion intelligence. It's being able to say, this is how I feel. And sometimes that's about, this is how I feel physically. I feel hot, I feel cold, I feel knotty, I feel gnarly, I feel aggravated, I feel meh. So I'm not overly concerned with people necessarily, using an accurate emotional label. But being able to just, be be emotion intelligent or emotion aware rather than emotionally intelligent or emotionally aware. Because it's all very well to go, I'm feeling emotional at the moment, and even then, if you use the word emotional, that has such strong implication with crying and sadness.
Negative connotation.
And also some collocations as well. So if you look at linguistically, if you look at what sits around the word emotional, sadness features more often than any other emotion. It collocates around it regularly. But I agree with you. Being able to, or taking the time to name, not necessarily being able to, taking the time to name how you're feeling and be able to articulate that in some way, not necessarily an articulate or logical way, but just the physical articulation of it.
What it is to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, I might look at your face and go, you know what, you say you're angry, but you actually look really sad. But that doesn't matter. That's not the point. My job isn't to go, are you sure you're angry or are you actually sad? Or to quote the kids' kind of animation movie Home, are you mad sad? Are you both mad and sad?
Which is so right. Yeah. The other thing is we go, we lump it all into one emotion. We're not experiencing one emotion at a time. We can have so many emotions, which makes research really complex, particularly what are you surface acting, what are you deep acting, what is it you're displaying? There's a multitude which adds to the confusion within us. And just sitting down and going, well, I feel this about this, I feel that about that, sometimes helps to separate and understand things and then process a bit more.
Brilliant.
So I smile a lot. I go, yeah, I'm really scared, she said, grinning. People go, really?
Oh, SJ, thank you so much for your time today.
No, brilliant.
Thoroughly enjoyed our chat. I cannot wait to hear more about how your PhD research, kind of continues, and then to see what you kind of pull together at the end. And
thank you.
It's been so much fun today.
Thank you very much, and good luck to you. I'm looking forward to you joining us very soon at ManMat, I hope
so too. Fingers crossed. All right, so let's bring it together. So thank you very much, SJ. Thanks for taking part in the Emotional Work podcast for this episode. And we'll put all the links to everything we've talked about, the different studies, the different researchers, all that stuff, and the books and everything. We'll pull that together. So if people want to if listeners want to go and find out more, then they can. But all that leads me to do is say, SJ, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for speaking. It's inviting me on. Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thanks, SJ. Take care.
Take care. Cheers.
Bye.
You've been listening to the Emotion at Work podcast. Written, recorded and presented by Phil Wilcox. Edited together by Simon Leverton. You can find more information at emotionatwork.co.uk or follow us on Twitter at @PhilWilcox. Thanks for listening.